Hello, today I'm going to discuss chapter 23, which is figures of speech. Figures of speech is a word or phrase used in a non-literal sense to add rhetorical force to a spoken or written passage. The first major topic in this chapter would be figurative language. Figurative language is language that uses words or expressions with a meaning that is different from the literal interpretation. Uses exaggerations or alterations to make a particular linguistic point. There are many different types of figurative languages, including metaphor, simile, personification, hyperbole, and symbolism. The first example used in the book would be on page 752 by William Shakespeare. Name of the poem is Romeo and Juliet. In quotations, but stop. What light through yonder window break? It is east, and in Juliet is the sun. The second example in which I found would be on page 753 by Michael Ondaatje. Name of the poem is Sweet Like a Cow, Like a Crow. In quotations, your voice sounds like a scorpion being pushed through a glass tube. Now, the second major topic in this chapter would be simile and metaphor. The two most commonly used figures of speech express resemblances between two unlike things. A simile is a figure of speech involving the comparison of one thing with another thing of a different kind, used to make a description more empathic or vivid. A metaphor is a figure of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object or action to which it is not literally applicable. The first example I found in the book, this is actually my example, and it's an example of a simile by N. Scott Monaday. The name of the poem is Simile, page 757. In quotations, what did we say to each other that now we are as the deer? The second example I found, which is a book example located on page 761, and it is a metaphor. When you're a big fish in a small pond, you don't want to end up with your tail between your legs. The third major topic in this chapter would be hyperbole and understatement. These two figures of speech helps writers achieve vivid descriptions. Hyperbole is an extravagant statement, a figure of speech not intended to be taken literally. An understatement is a purposeful tool in description. The first example is going to be mine, and it's in a hyperbole on page 762 by Robert Frost. Name of the poem is Fire and Ice. In quotations, some say the world will end in fire. The second example, which was given by the book, is on page 761, and it is an example of an understatement. In quotations, pretty smart guy, and it's referring to Albert Einstein. Now, the fourth major topic in this chapter is going to be synecdoche and metonymy. Synecdoche is a figure of speech in which a part is made to represent the whole or vice versa. Metonymy is the substitution of the name of an attribute or adjacent for that of the thing meant. The first example is my example, and it's the synecdoche on page 764 by Henry Reed. Naming of the parts is the name of the poem. In quotations, this is the lower sling swivel. The second example I'm going to use is a metonymy, and it's the book example on page 763. The name of the poem is Hired Guns, and a metonymy for an individual paid to shoot people. Okay, the fifth major topic in this chapter is going to be personification and apostrophe. Personification is figures of speech in which writers ascribe human traits or behavior to something inhuman. Apostrophe describes figures of speech in which a writer calls out an unseen person, force, or a personified idea. The first example is going to be personification, and this is actually my example. On page 766, William Wordsworth. The name of the poem is composed of on Westminster Bridge, September 3rd, 1802. In quotations, this city not doubt, like a garment, wear the beauty of the morning. The second example is going to be the book's example, and it's on page 767 by John Keats, Odie, and O Grecian Urn. is the name of the poem. In quotation, thou still unravished bride of quietness. The sixth major topic in this chapter is going to be a paradox and an oxymoron. A paradox is a seemingly contradictory statement that, when closely examined, have a deeper, sometimes complicated meaning. Oxymoron is a version of paradox that combines contradictory words into a compact, often two-word phrase. The first example is going to be a paradox, and it's an example given by the book on page 769 by George Bernard Shaw. The name of the poem is Wasted on the Young, and that's a paradox. The second is going to be on page 770 by Matsu Bashu, and the name of the poem is Kato. Even in Kato, hearing a cuckoo, I long for Kato. The seventh major topic in this chapter is going to be a pun, and it is a play on words that reveals different meanings in words that are similar or even identical. The first example in the book gave will be on page 771 by William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. In quotations, ask for me tomorrow, and you shall find me a grave man. The second example is going to be mine, and it's on page 771 by A.R. Ammons. The name of the poem is Their Sex Life. In quotations, one failure on top of another. The eighth and final major topic in this chapter is going to be humor, and it is the quality of being amusing or comic, especially as expressed in literature or speech. The first example that the book gave was on page 772. It's cold as well diggers as. The second example in which I found was on page 773.